and welcome to this episode of SelfKind with me, Erica Webb, and my guest today. And I am so excited to have Kate with me. I was just telling Kate, I was like looking back to see when we last chatted on the podcast, and it turns out we never did. So I had a false memory in my mind that we'd talked before on this podcast, but we haven't. So welcome for the first time, Kate, to the SelfKind podcast. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Erica. My name is Kate Zanoni. I am a strength coach for outdoor athletes, mostly hikers, but definitely anything in the outdoor space is my realm. I also have a 9 to 5 job full time. So I am definitely busy.
Yeah. And you live in a beautiful part of the world. I see your photos on Instagram and you live like, obviously being a nature lover, you live somewhere where you get a really beautiful nature hit. Where are you?
I'm in Boise, Idaho, which is an outdoor paradise. My husband and I moved here almost 5 years ago from Washington, D.C., which was
Ah.
a complete 180, totally different from city life on the East Coast. But we absolutely love it. It's beautiful
Mm.
out here. Idaho is a hidden gem in terms of anything outdoorsy. We're hiking in the summer, paddle boarding on the lake. In the winter, we're snowshoeing, going skiing. So there's something to do, whether you love camping, anything outdoors that you can do. My husband's really into mountain biking. We're out there doing it, so we love it.
That's cool. I love that. And I think we'll probably talk a lot more about that as we sort of talk about HSP things, because nature is very lovely for us HSPs. But Kate was one of the people who very generously put up her hand when I did a little call out to say, hey, I want to talk to more HSPs on the podcast. And I was saying to Kate that I highly suspected that Kate was a highly sensitive person, and she confirmed that by popping into my inbox and saying, yes, I'll talk. So I guess an interesting place to start, Kate, might be just to talk about, like, how did you figure out you were a HSP and when was that in your life? Like, did you know when you were young? Have you just figured this out recently? What was that process for you to sort of go, oh, yeah, I'm a sensitive one?
I definitely knew as a kid, pretty young. I don't know exactly what age, but probably preschool or kindergarten age. I just had this notion that I was just in tune to people's emotions and people around me. Would kind of take on what they were feeling. At the time, I didn't know what that meant, and as I got older and learned about HSP, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's me."
Yeah, and that seems to be the way that it happens in terms of I'm yet to hear anyone be like, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like usually when we hear the description, it's like, oh, oh yeah, that's absolutely me. I didn't know it was like something that had a name necessarily, but we see ourselves in that description really, really clearly. So it sounds like you probably have got those sort of empath qualities as well if you're sort of taking on people's emotions. And I feel like that can be incredibly difficult as a kid. I was the same. I remember my teachers used to sit me next to, the quote unquote naughty boys because I would have a way of calming them down. But in hindsight, I think I was probably just absorbing their stuff. But what was that like for you as a kid? Did it feel disruptive, or do you think that it was something that, you could kind of just navigate because you're a kid and, you didn't know any different?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I think it's wonderful to be so empathetic, but it also can be challenging to take on other people's feelings and emotions too, especially when there are difficult, heavy things going on in the world on a larger scale, and you feel that internally. And I'm sure you're the same way, and you kind of feel some of that energy somatically, and it
Mm-hmm.
can affect you physically as well. That's definitely a challenge. I remember, I think I was in second or third grade, um, and my teacher had us do an exercise where we had to draw something. And I drew a picture with a peace sign. And I wrote on there, I just want the war to end. And it was
Mm.
during the Gulf War. And she pulled me aside and said, what is this about? And she was kind of upset about it, like almost accusatory.
Oh,
And I
wow.
just explained, like, there are other things going on in the world. And I might be a kid, but I understand what it is.
Yeah, wow. Wow. very perceptive for a young kid, and how interesting that that was her response. I find
Mhm.
that fascinating. I think that one of the things I haven't, well, I guess we've talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but I think we could go down this rabbit hole a little bit together because I know that you are very in tune with your sort of somatic sensations in the body. I think what you said that just then was really interesting around how that does show up somatically. That is huge. And I think it can show up in different ways for different highly sensitive people. Some people get headaches, some people get, muscle aches and pains, some people get sick, depending on what the environment is like. What is, and as much as you want to share, like, what is your somatic experience of having that, I guess, emotional load that can come with being an empathetic HSP? And I mean, all HSPs are empathetic, but some, that is kind of the primary, I guess, sensitivity is around empathy. Um, what shows up for you? I think it would be really helpful for other people to hear some different experiences.
Yeah, I usually feel it in my stomach. Sometimes it's just nausea. Sometimes it's a little bit deeper, really bad stomach pains. Sometimes I get physically ill. When I was, I think in fourth grade, I was about 10 years old. I was having chronic stomach aches every single day. Doctors couldn't figure out what it was, and it was stress related. Um, at 10 years old, which is a horrible thing to say, but
It's true though, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Have you found that easier to navigate as an adult?
No.
No.
I
I'm
wish I could
sure.
say yes, but unfortunately, no.
I think that's so important to hear though. Like, sometimes I think that that's one of the trickiest parts about being a highly sensitive person is that the depth of processing that happens as HSP, it's so automatic. You actually can't just like be like, I don't want to feel that, right? It doesn't
Right,
work like
right.
that. It's like saying, oh, I'd rather the sun didn't come up today. It's like, well, sorry, that's just how this works. Um, so maybe maybe we can rewind a little bit. And what's life been like for you as a highly sensitive person? Like, you sort of mentioned how there's double-edged sword there, and that there's some benefits and there's some challenges. um, why don't we talk about some of the benefits first? Give a little bit of
Absolutely. I
sunshine.
think it can
Yeah.
be a wonderful way to really connect with people. After
Mm.
I graduated from college, I started a nonprofit project and I went overseas and volunteered in a pediatric AIDS clinic. And really being able to connect with the patients and understand what they were going through. I started a reading therapy program there for them, and that was
Wow.
something that I feel like if I didn't have that sensitivity and that ability to really tune into what people are going through, it wouldn't have been the success that it was.
Mm. Which is so interesting. I was talking, Addie DeHilster.
Mhm.
We float around in the same circle. So when Addie came on, she was talking about some voluntary work that she does in the hospital, and we were talking about how there can be some challenges as a highly sensitive person going into environments like that because they can be so bombarding. And so we were just sort of talking about how she's navigated that. And that's what I'm shocked by in the story that you're telling, because I imagine that going overseas into a highly stimulating, unfamiliar to you environment, you had that beautiful benefit of like, yeah, I can empathize with the patients. I can be really, present with them and share authentically from this place of sensitivity. What was the flip side of that, though, in terms of how that empathy then affected you? Because I imagine that there must have been a little bit of both.
Yeah, very difficult from an emotional standpoint. And the cultural difference, too, where I was, a lot of the healthcare workers were kind of desensitized.
Mm.
So if there was a patient coding, it was, oh, I'm on my lunch break. It's like, come on, that's a medical emergency. Like, you need to act right away. You can't just say, oh, I'm drinking my tea and leave it at that. So that was really difficult to watch and experience because I, at the time, was not a licensed healthcare provider. I am now, so I couldn't step in and do anything at the time. So that was really hard.
Yes, gosh, I can imagine. What is it then that tips the balance for you to say, I want to be here doing this kind of work that feels important, even though it's hard? I was like, what's the support? What's the values kind of stuff that sits underneath it? What is it for you that makes the struggle, I guess, or the challenge of those sorts of experiences with it?
I think it's just the internal pull to be able to bring people just a little bit of joy, especially
Mm.
in a situation like that where they're in, a very dark place in a time of need, um, having a terminal illness. Um, you know, Medicine has come a long way since then, and it's not considered terminal anymore. Um, but at the time, it was. So being able to bring people just a little bit of sunshine in such a dark point in their lives really is special to me.
Yeah, I love that. And you do hear that a lot within the HSP world, that having a sense of purpose and having a
Mhm.
sense of making a difference in your work is so important for so many different reasons, but it seems to be particularly significant for HSPs. And it does seem to have some mm, kind of like bolstering effect on the challenge that also presents. So that's a really beautiful example of that, I think. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it makes the challenging side of it all worth it.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Um, were you so if we talk about the other challenges, then, like, were you told anything about your sensitivity by other people when you were younger? Like, I imagine with that teacher who's like, hang on a minute, pulling you aside, like, what is going on? Do you remember kind of thinking, oh, I'm too much, or I'm too much of a crybaby, or I'm too much of this? Like, what was that like for you as little Kate?
Oh, 100%. Especially, I feel like being a woman too. Oh,
Mm.
we're overly emotional. We cry too much. Yeah, you hear it from all sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's so tricky too, because then we carry that into our adult lives and we're trying to be
Mhm.
like kind of just, quote unquote normal. And it's like, oh, but there's all this stuff on the inside, and I've been told it's too much to deal with, or it's too hard. And gosh, that can be so difficult.
I know, and being emotional is part of being human. And I feel like society tends to want us to shy away from that human side of really expressing our emotions. And it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. So I so agree with you. I've been thinking about that concept a lot lately, and just thinking how I think so much of that is because our emotions just make other people really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, please just be okay. I don't want to deal with this. And so then we start to like internalize that. It's so interesting when it is such a normal part of being human, how like we are about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I always joke I'm
Yeah.
in therapy for the people who won't go to therapy.
100%. 100%. And, it's interesting. Highly sensitive people tend to front up for therapy more often too. It is definitely a thing, because it's like, hang on, I want to understand, I want to understand how people tick, why they do the things that they do.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So what's it like for you at the moment as a highly sensitive person? Like, where does this show up the most for you now? Kind of, you've had those past experiences, and have you, I guess, organized your life in any way to cater to your high sensitivity? I find that often happens. I'd be curious to know if that's shown up for you.
Yes. So I now work from home, which happened
Ah,
in 2021 and was a huge difference for me. Being able to have a little bit more flexibility in my day. I still have a meeting scheduled throughout the day. But if I need to go to therapy or have a doctor's appointment, I can schedule that when I need to. So being able to have that flexibility has been a world of difference. Not having to have a commute, being able to be home with my dog, who is also highly sensitive, which I find hilarious.
yes.
Yeah, it's made a world of difference for me.
Mm. Prior to that, were you actually going into an office 5 days a week?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. What was the consequence of that? What would happen?
I think a lot of the time, so I was working in healthcare, so being able to and being around people who are not feeling at their best. I was working in physical therapy as a physical therapist assistant. You definitely take on those emotions of people when they're feeling really down. They're not able to do the activities that they love. They're in pain. You take on a lot of that emotion,
Mm,
which can be really heavy. But it is a wonderful profession to be in. It's so rewarding to be able to help people get back to the things that they love and seeing their progress along the way, and helping their wins is amazing. But with that comes long days, having to do your paperwork off the clock, not getting paid for it, very long hours, feeling like you're kind of a cog in the wheel, stuck on a conveyor belt, with the way that the U.S. healthcare system is such a mess.
yeah.
And I could talk all day about that, but I won't go down that rabbit hole right now.
Fair.
um, so stepping out of that and pivoting my career was integral for not just my mental health but my physical health as well. I think just the stress of working those long hours and the specific environment in the specific clinic that I was in, it was a very manipulative and not necessarily ethical environment.
Hmm.
So that definitely took a toll on my health. I was getting sick a lot. So when I made the transition to not being in an office around that many people all the time, my health transformed too.
Yeah, that's huge. That is actually massive. I also used to work in an office that was had questionable things happening, and it's hard. It's really hard to kind of persist in that kind of environment. What strikes me though is how you like the work, right? And that's
Mhm.
sometimes I think what can be so hard is like, but I like what I do, and yet at
Right.
the end of the day, I come home and I'm exhausted and I'm drained and I'm kind of not my best. So like, how do you navigate the that big question, I guess, around like, well, then what do I do next? What was that like for you in terms of, because it sounds like you maybe changed paths a little bit if you were
I did.
physically working with people.
I
Yeah.
absolutely did. And it was hard. And that's why I stayed in the profession for a decade.
Hmm.
Absolutely loved it. And that's why I stayed in it, because it was so rewarding. I've always been a helper type of person, but I was always putting myself last. And
Hmm.
even when I initially made this pivot, I was still putting myself last, putting everybody else forward. Everybody else comes first, work comes first, I come last, always. And it took a toll on my health again. And that's when I knew that I needed to make a change.
Mm. Was there any practical stuff that you had to do to make that change? Like, I always just think of like, well, what gets in the way for people? Because I just can't, I just imagine that must have been really hard to like be like, okay, I'm stepping away from this career that I love. Like, had you found something else that you wanted to do, or like which came first, the decision that like I have to change what I'm doing, or oh, I think I would love to do this? Maybe that's a way to kind of
It was
bridge
definitely
that.
the decision of I need to do something different.
Ah.
And I was being pulled into, doing something on my own. And that's where I started exploring strength training people. When people would graduate from physical therapy, they still wanted to work with me. So finding an avenue to be able to still support
Mm.
people after they had graduated from physical therapy, but still needed a little bit more support to get them to where they really wanted to be, was kind of the avenue to me starting my business, which was something that I never thought I would ever do. Kind
Yeah.
of always had it in the back of my mind, but couldn't really see how it would come to fruition. And the universe just kind of made it happen.
Mm, that's really cool. Love it when the universe comes on board with things like that. It's it is funny how many sensitive people will end up kind of falling into working for themselves, or
Mhm.
those very flexible working arrangements. And I think that often people feel really bad about that, feel really bad about the fact that, oh, I just can't kind of survive in a work setting. So it's helpful to hear the impact that it has on other people, because it's such a real impact. You talk about like I was getting sick all the time. My health was really at risk. Um, What was I want to kind of move to talking about nature in a minute, but I want to kind of get a sense of, like, you said something about, like, I was always putting myself last. Everybody else always came first. What was the thing that allowed you to switch that balance a little bit? Because it sounds, I think I'm maybe hopefully not mishearing, but it sounds like at some point that balance switched a little bit, or at least, balanced out a little. Um, was it your health that triggered that? Was it some sudden, like, epiphany? Like, what was it that made you say, okay, enough's enough, Kate. We don't need to constantly be prioritizing everybody else to my detriment?
Yeah, 100%. It was my own health, but it was also the pandemic. I think it
Ah,
was eye-opening for so many people of how we don't take care of ourselves, how society encourages us to go to work when we're sick. For a lot of people, if you don't work, if you have to take a sick day, you don't get paid.
yeah.
So that has a whole other ramification too. It's economic. It's not just about health. There's so many factors that go into it. So that definitely played a huge role in me deciding to pivot.
Yeah. Yeah, the pandemic did us a few favors in that regard, didn't it? I mean, it was
Mhm.
pretty bad, but yeah, it definitely shone, can't say that word, a spotlight on a very messed up culture around you will perform at all costs.
Yep.
That was interesting to watch, because we're not robots, but we were expected to be. And it's interesting. I'm starting to believe that that has maybe crept back a little bit. I'm seeing definitely sick people going to work, and that seems to have shifted back a little bit, I think, unfortunately. But there is definitely still that pervasive mentality of, like, oh, well, work has to be
Yep.
done.
Yep.
Um, what do you gain from at least trying to extract yourself from that? Like, how do you feel different now, having made those shifts?
I think I've let go of the guilt. So if I do need to take a day off to take care of myself, whether I'm sick or I need a mental health day, I
Mm,
don't feel guilty about it anymore. I
yeah.
know that I need to take that time to be able to perform my best, not just for myself, but for the team that I support. If I'm dragging myself and coming into work because my toxic boss says, you're not in the hospital, you're fine to come to work. And yes, I did have a toxic boss that said that
Mm, mm,
specifically. Thank God he's not my boss anymore.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, that's the mentality of a lot of people, and it's so detrimental.
Mm. Do you have any sense of what allowed you to let go of that guilt?
I think out of necessity.
Yeah.
I just, physically breaking down, my body breaking down, mentally breaking down,
Yeah.
and needing to seek out that extra help. Finally found the right therapist, which was challenging in and of itself. Again,
Totally.
because the US healthcare system is very difficult. And where I live in Boise, the mental health care system is not great. So finding a good therapist was challenging. It took a couple of trial and errors with some therapists that just weren't the right vibe, wasn't the
Mm.
right type of therapist. I was actually diagnosed with PTSD. So finding somebody to help me navigate that was really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important for people to hear too, that, like, trial and error is okay when it comes to finding a therapist, especially as a highly sensitive person, and especially as a highly sensitive person dealing with trauma, because they have to get that. They have to get that, this is not the same as it might show up in other people.
Right.
Um, yeah, because it takes something different to sit with a highly sensitive person, I think, than it does to, and I mean, non-highly sensitive people are sensitive souls too, but it's different, right? The overstimulation, the emotional overwhelm, all of that is so real. So I applaud you for continuing to kind of, shop around, I guess, for want of a better
Yeah,
term,
thank you.
because it's so important. Yeah, it's so important. Let's talk about nature. Let's
Yes.
talk about the role that that plays. And I saw a drawing on your page the other day too. Is that your drawing?
I wish I could say yes. No, it's
Okay.
not.
I was going to say, because I think we need to talk about creativity as well. It was
Yes.
gorgeous. I'm
Yes.
going to link I'm going to link your Instagram so everybody can go see what I'm talking about, but it's a picture, like a drawing of Kate and her dog, and it's just amazing. It's so cute. Um So nature obviously plays a really huge role in your life. That's super evident to anybody who, follows you, not even closely. You just have to follow from a distance to be able to see that that's the case. I would love you to talk just a little bit about how that impacts your sensitive system, because I think it's easy to ignore how impactful that can be, because if you're not living in a beautiful kind of part of the world where so much of it is kind of centered around being outside, it can be hard to be like, oh, I got to go put my feet in the grass and I got to go, find some sunshine. But what is that experience for you like, of connecting with nature and in the light of your sensitivity?
Yeah, so that's something, and I used to live when I lived on the East Coast. I lived in a very urban area,
Mm.
so I was one of those people where, oh my gosh, like I have to find a green patch of grass somewhere to go walk there.
Yes. Buy a little square of grass and put it
Right,
in
right.
there.
So now living in, somewhere where it's like nature's paradise has been transformative for my health, and I didn't realize how transformative it would be until I was in it. And
Ah.
it's been life changing. And I think part of that was pivoting to working from home too. I can go outside on my lunch break. I can take a walk through the neighborhood. I can walk barefoot in the grass, reconnect with nature if I just need that little break in the middle of the day. And that's something that not a lot of people can do. So I consider myself incredibly fortunate to be able to have that opportunity. But getting out in nature is just so healing, and I feel like it's underlooked by so many people. And they think people are being woo woo when they talk about it, but I think there's something to it. I mean,
Absolutely.
scientifically speaking too.
Yeah.
And the energy from the earth that we get from grounding, I mean, there's just so many benefits to it.
Yeah, I have a colleague and a friend who is a forest therapist and has founded a forest therapy group here where I live. And I did some of the professional development with him, and there is so much science to back that up, so much science about, even the way our immune systems respond to being in nature and amongst the trees. There is absolutely no denying it. For you, is it like, is there something specific, or is it literally just being outdoors? Like, because I know you do heaps and heaps of different activities outdoors, but is it kind of, do you think, the act of being with nature rather than any of the actual activities? Because I feel like they're almost slightly different things. I imagine that there's some joy and some excitement and some other things that come from some of the like sports that you do out there. But is it the simple act of, if somebody's like, oh, I don't want to hike, I don't want to snowshoe, or there's no snow around here, or whatever. Is it just being with the trees and being with the outdoors?
For me, it is. And I think it can be a little bit of both depending on what you enjoy doing outside. But just being immersed in nature, being among the trees it's so calming to my nervous system. It's like almost like flipping a switch, and my nervous system just goes, ah, I can take a deep breath now.
Yeah. I think we often don't realize how kind of like guarded we can become when we move through the
Right.
day without it. Yeah. It's such a good point. It makes me think I went shopping for some plants recently, because in the 10, nearly 11 years we've lived in the house that we're in, we live in a beautiful, we've got lots of nature around us, but our backyard, it was completely devoid of plants, like none. And I'm like, I have to fix this problem. This is like every day I look out the window and I'm like, there is no plants. What is happening? And so I just went crazy. I bought all these plants. There was a big sale on at a local nursery, and I just went and bought all these plants. And even something so simple as that can make a big difference. I know for me too, I have a lot of indoor house plants, and that changed my life. Just
Yes.
having plants in my house was transformative. I think we definitely can't underestimate that.
Yes, for me too. And I have a similar story with our yard as well. It was our house was a new build, so we didn't even have grass when we first moved in.
Oh, I
So
remember watching that. Yeah.
yeah, it's been a constant work in progress, and we're almost 5 years in, and we're still working on it.
Well,
But I
I didn't have a garden for
absolutely love
11
it.
years.
Yeah, and I unfortunately do not have a green thumb. I am the
Me
killer
either.
of many plants, but but
But
I
that's the
love
thing, it
it.
doesn't matter.
Yeah. I've developed such a love for gardening, and that's something that I never even like it didn't even cross my mind. It just kind of happened, and I absolutely
Oh.
love it.
That's cool. I really like that story. I also do not have a green thumb. I didn't, we didn't grow up gardening. There was just sort of like not a thing. And now I'm like still not a good gardener, but I want plants around me. So I'm like, I guess I'm going to have to learn because I'm going to have
Yep.
to grow things and not kill them. Um, I actually think that's such a good point, like for the highly sensitive people listening. Sometimes I think finding the things that nurture us and help us regulate our systems, it's where we see something and it's jarring, right? So like for me looking out the window and being like, oh, like it doesn't look the way I want it to look, not from even an
Mhm.
aesthetic point of view, but it's just bare, it's cold. I want there to be flowers and warmth and all of that. I think it can be so helpful to just notice like when does your body, when does your nervous system respond in a way that goes, huh, maybe there's something here that could be shifted or changed to support me and my sensitivity a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Do you find I'm an introvert too?
same.
And I know that not everybody is outdoorsy and they won't resonate with going out in nature and being among the trees.
Yeah.
You know, I also love cuddling on the couch with my dog under a
Yes.
blanket. So
Yes.
I feel like for highly sensitive folks, it's about finding what works for you, what nourishes your nervous system, and it's not going to be just one single thing either. There are so many simple little things, whether it's having a warm cup of tea, taking a nap, going outside and going for a walk. There are so many different things that you can do to calm your nervous system and to really nourish your
Mm.
soul.
That was going to be my next question. So you did that beautifully. I was going to say, do you have things that you do? Like, I know I'm not a particularly routine person. I want to be, but I'm not. But there are certain things that kind of show up in my day quite routinely, even though they're not necessarily planned. And I wonder if you've got those things, whether you actually have a routine and you're a bit more organized than me, or if there's things that, yeah, kind of punctuate your day, like, yeah, the cup of tea or the lunchtime walk. Like, how have you inserted those nervous system nurturing practices throughout your day? I'd love to hear what that looks like.
I wish I could say that I was wonderfully organized and had a perfect routine. I don't. My life is chaos.
Same, girlfriend. Yep. I actually want to know if that's a highly sensitive person thing
Yeah,
because
probably.
I cannot. I'm like, I need someone to organize my life.
Which is funny because at work I'm very organized. I'm overly organized. But yeah,
Interesting.
life-wise, not so much.
Yeah, yeah. But is there some, do you think that there's still some things that you're like, oh yeah, but that happens regularly? Like,
Definitely. I always keep a glass of water next to me when I go to bed. When I wake up in the morning, I always drink a glass of water. I'm big on hydration. I also pee a lot.
yeah. Sadly, they go hand in
They go
hand.
hand in hand. I do try to walk at least a little bit in the afternoon when I take my lunch break, even if it's just to go out to the mailbox, down the driveway and get the mail and come back in. Just at least spend, 5-10 minutes outside if I can during the day.
Mm,
It's really nice out. Sometimes I'll eat lunch outside. So just being able to do those little things to fit in your day. When I worked in person in an office, sometimes it was just taking a minute to just go outside and breathe, and just have that one-on-one time with yourself. Because sometimes you need that as a highly sensitive person. You can be easily overstimulated, especially when you're dealing with the public all day. It can be a lot on your nervous system. So just taking a
yeah.
time, a minute to go breathe, sometimes hiding in the bathroom for a minute, whatever you need.
Yes. I've done the hiding in the bathroom before. Um,
We all have.
it's such a good one.
Yep.
I
Crying
wonder
in the
what,
shower is another
yeah,
one.
absolutely. Emotional expression, so important. I had a thought then and then it popped out when I was thinking about emotional expression in the shower. Um, it's gone. That's okay. It'll come back. Oh yes, I was going to say, what do you have to believe about your sensitivity in order to make kind of punctuating your days with those things possible? Because I think that there is a belief that we have to have about what our sensitivity means or represents or requires to actually say, okay, like, no, I'm not going to go against, I'm not going to go just with the flow here and do what everybody else is doing, which is going to drive me into overwhelm. Um, what do you believe about your sensitivity that allows you to actually take that time?
It's taken me some time to realize because society teaches us that being sensitive can be a negative thing. But I think turning it over and finding the positive in it into what gifts it really does bring us has been life changing. I mean, it really changes your whole perspective on how you see yourself, not just other people, but how you treat yourself and how you give yourself that self care. Even if it's just taking, a couple of minutes out of your day to take care of yourself, those little moments add up over time and they really matter.
Yeah. And I like that about what you said around like it could just be 5 minutes. It really doesn't
Mhm.
have to take a lot from you. And it sounds to me like the thing that kind of underpins all of it is you respect your sensitivity, you respect yourself ultimately at
Right,
the end of the
right.
day. Mm. Yes, and it's an ongoing pursuit, right? Like I think that's the thing that can be so interesting too. Is there anything at the moment that you're like, oh, this, this part of my sensitivity or this impact of my sensitivity feels tricky and so like trying to navigate? Because I find for me that is often true that there's something that I'm kind of like, okay, this is where my sensitivity feels like it's tripping me up at the moment. What can I do? What can I sort of tweak to be able to
Yeah,
feel better?
I feel like it shows up for me at work a lot.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things in my position that I don't have control over, and I am a huge
Ah.
control person. So
Yep.
learning to let go of those things and saying, you know what, I'm doing what I can and that's all I can do. I don't have control over the situation. Whatever happens is going to be what happens, and learning to roll with it. It's not always easy, but I think, and therapy has helped me with that a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of getting the mental health support that you need to. If you feel like you're feeling stuck, or you don't have the support that you need, being an advocate for yourself. And even if you do have to be like me and trial and error with a couple of different therapists until you find the right fit, I'm a huge, huge,
Yeah.
huge advocate for that. And I wish that mental health was easily accessible to everybody. I'm not sure how it is around the world, but in the United States, it is expensive. It's often not covered by insurance. Even if it is, you usually still have to pay at least a copay out of pocket, take time off work,
Yeah.
which can be challenging depending on what your job is. So there are a lot of factors at work there.
That's so true. I mean, I think things are different here in Australia, but I wouldn't say that they're perfect. It is still very expensive to access mental health care, and I think the real challenge is, beyond the expense of it, is really that trying to find that right fit can be hard.
Mhm.
It's so necessary to feel like you can be honest with the person that you're sitting with and feel safe there, and that's
Right.
not something that you're going to find with every therapist. It just doesn't work that way. So I think that that's awesome to hear, and that can be overwhelming because you've got to go through the process of having a session, paying the money, and being like, okay, well, it wasn't them.
Right,
Um,
right.
what advice would you have for people if that's what they come up against, like you have, going, oh, not this person, but like, because it must be frustrating. I mean, I've been through several therapists myself, so I do get it. I remember the first time I went and saw someone when I was a teenager, and I just was like, I'm never seeing that person again. I really hated the experience. Um, but what would your advice be if you're like, I know I need support, but I just can't seem to find the right person? Like, is there a way to do that research, I guess, behind the scenes before you end up in front of this person? Like, what's worked for you to just persist?
There are some resources online. I know, I think it's psychology.com and psychology
Psychology
today.
Today. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
psychologytoday.com as well. They have amazing resources. You can always look in your local area too for therapists, and usually they'll have a bio up, so you can search for different characteristics that you're looking for if you're looking for a specific specialty. I when I was diagnosed with PTSD, wanted to explore EMDR. So
Yes.
I found a local therapist who offers that, and it's been difficult but amazing. And that's one thing that I want to be really transparent about, is that going to therapy is not like flipping a switch. It's not like sunshine and rainbows. It's hard work.
Well, yeah.
It's emotional, it's hard work, but it's worth it.
Yeah. I echo that. I echo that. And to add to your suggestions there, sometimes on Psychology Today, they'll have a little video as well. So it can be
Mhm.
really helpful just to see somebody talk. I think that's often been really helpful for me, to actually just see somebody, follow their Instagram, see if they post stories, see them talk, see like, is that someone I think I'd like to be in a room with? Because I think that actually does translate quite well often through the screen. I think we used to
Mhm.
think that that wasn't true, but I think we're starting to really recognize that, if that person is kind of giving you their authentic self, you can feel that, I think, which is, especially for highly sensitive people, you pick up on it for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And there are more resources now too. There are mental health apps, like BetterHelp is an example.
Yes.
I know I didn't have a great experience with it, but I know some people who really have, and they've found therapists that they really resonate with. You can do telehealth if going
Yeah.
in person is a barrier. So there are other resources out there too that can kind of help break some of those barriers down.
Such a good point. I've even seen recently text-based therapy, which,
Mhm.
I think for highly sensitive and introverted people, some of those other ways of working can be really helpful. I know some of my highly sensitive clients prefer in person because they like the connection in person, but a lot of highly sensitive people prefer to do it online because,
Absolutely.
it creates a little bit of a buffering. And I know in my experiences, I personally prefer online. I have historically preferred online as a client, not as a therapist, but so I think keep in mind that too, like what actually works for you and what works for your energy. I think that's such a good point. Have we missed anything that you were hoping to talk about? Like, did I miss any opportunities to ask you questions that you're like, oh, that would have been really helpful to share?
I want to ask you some questions.
Sure.
Let's get a little bit of your perspective as a
All right.
therapist. How do
All right.
you find that nature is healing for you?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I'm a little bit like you in the sense that I also do a lot of outdoor activities. So we ski, we water ski, we spend as a family a decent amount of time outdoors, but I'm also could easily go days without going outside. Like I'm kind of a bit of both. It's which is funny. I always think, oh, that's a bit of it. Like I'm you're probably not going to find me outside if it's like miserable. I'm not that interested. I like comfort, but for me, there's something. So I'm very much drawn to like bodies of water, not so much the ocean
Mhm.
as like rivers and lakes and things like that. So for me, I don't know, it's something about the peacefulness for my senses, probably more than anything. I like that I am just focused on, if I haven't got a podcast in or something, the sounds of nature. It's so quiet, and I'm very overwhelmed by sensory stuff. And so for me, nature represents peace, I think, more than anything. It's a sense of like,
Yes.
oh, I can exhale. There's nobody that I have, especially if I'm alone, there's nobody that I have to kind of try to figure out what I need to do around them. There's no self monitoring that I have to do. I'm not absorbing anybody's emotions. I'm not having to do any of that stuff. So for me, it's just peaceful, and that's the biggest element for me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like the ASMR that comes along with bodies of water
Yes.
too is just, it's so calming to your nervous system. Do
Yeah.
you do any kind of meditation apps or any kind of soundscapes or anything like that?
I actually don't. So I meditate most days, but I do just, I don't know. I don't even really call it meditation. Which is a little bit of there's a story behind that, but I mostly just sit quietly. So it's still mind meditation, I guess, is what it would be called in the meditation world. But that's my preference. I often don't listen to anything. I like to just shh.
Just me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But if I'm outside, like we have a lot of native birds around us. And if I would
Mhm.
get lucky enough to hear, like, we have something called a tawny frogmouth, which I'm not sure that, I don't know if you have those overseas. But it's sort of like an owl, but not really. And it has this very unusual call. And if we can hear those, or, we just have so much wildlife around. I'm delighted. Like, there is so much. I get just like I feel like a little kid, and I just feel so delighted by the sounds of nature. But yeah, I don't tend to listen to recorded ones, which is interesting. Maybe I should try.
Yeah, I'm very sensitive to light and sound.
Yeah.
So when I sleep, I need very dark room. I
Oh,
like
same.
it to be a little bit cool, and I'll just pile all the blankets on. In the
Yes.
winter, I look like a hobbit. I sleep with a hoodie with the hood up.
Yes.
But I use a white noise machine, and then sometimes I'll
Ah,
do a soundscape with some kind of nature sounds on top of it too.
that's cool. Yeah, I've never thought about that for sleep. I'm the same as you, though. It has to be dark, and I have to have something heavy on me,
Yeah,
which is so annoying when it's hot, because I'm
I
like,
know.
I need it to like feel okay, but I'm too hot. So it's like, it can be really hard. But, I think that I'm glad you asked those questions, because I think they're really interesting examples of how sometimes it can feel like we're inconvenient or too much or like too
Mhm.
fussy or too extra, And it's like, okay, but like these things actually give me a better quality of sleep. They make me feel better. It's so interesting that our default is to just be like, you shouldn't need anything, just go to sleep.
Right.
Um, and I just find that so fascinating. Like, what's your partner like? Is he highly sensitive?
He's not. He's the opposite.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
which is really interesting. But he's so in tune to me and how sensitive I am, which is so
Yeah.
sweet, because he is not that way at all.
So sensitive, just not highly sensitive. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
That's
So I
lovely.
almost wonder if needing the comfort of blankets, because I've always been that way too. Even when it's hot, I need to have a blanket on,
Hmm.
whether I'm sticking an arm or a leg out to
Yes.
cool
It's
myself
like,
off a little bit. But no matter how hot it is, I need to have at least, in the very least, a sheet on top of
oh,
me.
same. When I was a little kid, it was because I was quite confident a monster was going to eat me. But as an adult, it's definitely not that anymore. But it
Yeah.
is absolutely, there has to be something on me. I cannot deal if there's not. And it's like, I remember I went to an Airbnb or somewhere, and I got in there, and the sheet, like, it was just like this thin blanket. And we must have been somewhere warm, because I was just like, what is this? This is like taking a little Kleenex out of a box and putting it on top. I can't deal with this. I had to go rummaging for blankets, because I was like, that is not going to work.
That's not going to do. Yeah.
I have to have a pillow between my knees. I cannot sleep without a pillow between my knees.
Me too.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? And I think this is so useful for people to hear, because for me, it's like, I'm not going to tolerate the discomfort that comes with not having those things. And so we have to claim it, I think, and just say, yeah, this is what I need. But God,
Mhm.
it took me literally decades to get to that point.
Yeah, me too. And
Yeah.
I think it speaks to the difficulty of traveling as a highly sensitive person too, because we
Yes.
have these creature comforts at home. And sometimes when you're traveling, whether you're staying at a hotel or an Airbnb or you're camping, you never really know what kind of environment you're going to be in,
Hmm.
what the amenities are going to be like. Are you going to have an extra pillow to go between your knees? Are you going to have a
Exactly.
blanket? Or, some hotels or Airbnbs, it is that little piece of Kleenex, and you're like, oh man.
This is not enough. And
Yeah,
it's even flying. Like, I cannot sleep in a car, and I cannot sleep on a plane, and I've never been able to do it. And people are like, what's wrong? Like, why can't you just sleep? And I'm like, there's too much noise.
yep,
People are watching me. I cannot
yep.
do it. I just cannot do it. Can you sleep on a plane or in a car?
Not on a plane. In a car,
Okay.
I can.
Okay.
If I'm on a road trip and my husband's driving, absolutely I can.
Okay, that's
Um,
good.
yeah, I'm not a good navigator. Sorry, I'm
Neither am
napping.
I. I will get us lost. I will stay awake
But
and talk to you, but I
yeah,
cannot navigate.
but on a plane, absolutely not. Which is
No, which
is
is,
tough if you're traveling internationally or you have a particularly long flight. It's a challenge because I'm not sleeping. My nervous
yeah,
system is alert, and nope, no sleep is not happening.
same. I flew to LA a couple of years ago, and God, I didn't sleep because I cannot sleep on the plane. I probably dozed a little bit as I was watching a movie. But then when I got there, I just like had a full blown panic attack because I was so overstimulated and so exhausted. So that's another thing I think that can be so useful for other people to hear is like, what does overwhelm show up like for you? Like, what's the I know I'm supposed to be keeping an eye on the time, but let's just go here for a second.
No, forget the time. Let's chat.
Who cares? Who cares? You can push pause if it's too long. What does that show up for you like? Like I know you said it often shows up in your tummy, like the kind of empathy piece, but like what about when you're like fully overstimulated and it's like everything needs to stop? Do you get that these days, or yeah?
Not as much now, but it would definitely in the past show up as panic attacks,
Yeah.
like that tightness in your chest and breathing very heavily, sometimes sweating,
Yeah.
all the symptoms that come along with that. Absolutely,
Yeah. Awful. Awful.
almost like having an out of body experience.
Yes, 100%. And often I think as highly sensitive people, you can be very logical about it and be like, okay, here's this happening.
It's
And it
happening now,
can, yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting. What am I going to do? Yeah, it's tough. What do you think's reduced that for you?
I think for me, definitely getting back on medication. I had
Yeah.
tried medication about 10 years ago for my anxiety.
Hmm.
Um, the type of medication that they had me on didn't work for me.
Hmm.
My doctor kept me on it for almost a year, and I just felt almost disconnected from myself.
Hmm.
I didn't like the side effects that came along with it. Come to find out, the type of anxiety medication I was on was only meant for short term use, not long term use.
Oops.
So when yeah, it was rough trying to taper off of it. And I actually went through withdrawal because it was not meant to be a long term solution. So I went through a period of saying medication doesn't work for me,
Mm,
and trying to find other methods that helped me cope. Exercise was one of them, being in nature was another. But being in the stressful environment I was in for all those years, it wasn't enough.
yeah.
So being able to be okay with exploring medication again, and I found the right one that works for me, has been a game changer for sure.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. I think that's another really important thing. We bring in so many things that I just like. Let me just reiterate that. It's sort of like shopping around for that too, right? Like that's sort of what
Yeah.
I'm hearing. It's like maybe that one didn't work, and highly sensitive people can be particularly sensitive to medication too sometimes. Um, and so, hopefully having a doctor too that kind of gets that
Hmm.
can be really important. Um, and yeah, I think that one of the things that can come with the medication question can often be like we definitely can kind of get in our heads about like, is it the right thing, is it the wrong thing, blah 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 blah. um, but I love that you were willing to sort of step back and be like, hang on, maybe there isn't just one way to do this.
Right,
um,
right.
yeah.
And I think
Yeah,
breaking the stigma around it too. There's still so much
totally.
stigma around mental health in general, seeking help, getting therapy, going on medication. And I think we really need to break that down because it really does help people. And,
Absolutely.
medication isn't right for everybody. Therapy
Exactly. Yeah.
may not be the right avenue for everyone.
Yeah.
But I think it is a lot of times trial and error and finding what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a perfect place for us to kind of consider our last comments, perhaps. I think that is, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, but is there anything else that you want to throw in there or any kind of final thoughts that you feel kind of haven't been said yet?
I think self acceptance is a big one. We
Yeah,
touched on it a little bit, but I just want to reiterate how important it is to accept yourself as a highly sensitive person and know that it is a strength that's within you. It does come with its own challenges, but be kind to yourself.
I'm here for that message. I love that. So beautiful, such a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining me for this conversation. I really appreciate it so very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Erica. This is wonderful.